Okay, I'll call the January 26th Study Commission meeting to order. If we could have, we have Lori Casey, Cindy Perdue-Dolan, Ben Thielen may be late, Matt Steppen, myself, Dan Dennehy, Chad Silk, Cindy Shaw, and Mary McCormick. Can we have our Pledge of Allegiance and prayer, please? All right, thank you. I know we're loading a PowerPoint, or we're waiting to get that done, so I'm going to just make a couple of comments for the good of the order before we get that PowerPoint loaded. So tonight we do have our public comment section, and we welcome that comment. We will not be able to engage back and forth with you in deliberations. We will be making deliberations as a group tonight. The other item that I wanted to speak to was really our calendar of events and our schedule, because there's been some discussion about, what is happening when and when our final decisions are coming. And this process that we're in right now is still to form the preliminary report. It is to help us look at what are the most important issues that are rising to the top that our community wants to hear about. And then we will start that process of adopting that report by the end of February. So the subgroup that's working on the report was working today. We will have a report for the commission to be looking at in the next couple of weeks with all the things that we have heard about so far. We will get that edited and ready to be presented to the public by the end of February. And we'll adopt that preliminary report at that time. And our weeks might be a little bit flexible in regards to some of the work that's ongoing right now. In March, end of February into March, we will continue to have another set of public listening sessions. So we'll go back out to public to hear from them about that preliminary report and what will come forward, or what the public would like to see come forward to a ballot, or ballot questions. Then the second public hearing to gather citizen response to our tentative report would be at the end of March, and then moving into between March and July, where we adopt our final report. We will shape up and vote on those things that are going to go to ballot, and then those ballot questions will be affirmed by this commission. So that work between March and July isn't spelled out in everything that's happening every month, but we will be working on getting those ballot questions ready and adopting a final report. There will not be another public hearing between the March and July timeframe, between the adoption of the, prior to adoption of the final report. So that's our process for everybody to kind of recall, and for our audience members to understand. It may be that things that we're thinking about right now in the tentative report do not go forward to ballot, because this commission might decide that we need to focus our public's attention on certain issues, or we may find out that we're truly limited to 3 and that's all we can do, and we're still kind of working through that with county attorney and Ruth right now. So just be patient with the process and understand that it will unfold in the timely manner that we've agreed to. All right, our presentation is ready, yes? Okay. Nope, not yet. Almost, though. I just wanted to make sure that you were ready to go. All right. So with that, we have public comment for any item on the agenda. How about public comment on anything not on the agenda but within the jurisdiction of the study commission? All right, moving on. Approval of the minutes meeting held January 12th, 2026. Ms. McCormick.
I just had one comment that it's not any big deal, but on page 2, under item 6, when you have the points and there's the commission's work is focuses on structural changes, including, and then there's 2 subpoints under that, and it's the review of the number and compares composition of commissions. I think that commissions needs to be changed to Council of Commissioners.
Any further discussion? Ms. Shaw?
Thank you, Madam Chair. At this time, after we had Mary's correction, I would move to approve the minutes from the January 5th meeting with the amendment.
Is there a second? I have a second from Dolan. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Say nay. Motion carries. Thank you. All right, moving on. Correspondence and our study commission update. Any correspondence that has come in to date? Shanna, anything? Okay. And I didn't receive any in my inbox either. Ms. Dolan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We did get some information for the fire working group from the Volunteer Fire Council, and I'll forward that on. It's just, I thought we were going to get bullet points, but we got changes to the charter language, like 2.5 pages, so I'll forward that on to everybody when I get home. Apologize, did not do that. I forwarded it on to the working group.
Thank you. Any other correspondence? Okay, so moving on to
Madam Chair?
Oh, excuse me.
I
Ms.
think we
Casey?
need to acknowledge that we did receive a letter from the Fire Advisory Committee, and then it probably should be attached to this week's minutes.
Excellent, thank you. All right, moving on to unfinished business, or no? Ms. Dolan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think we need to bring up the fire advisory letter that was sent to us, because after following up with members of that fire advisory board, there was some discussion and dissension with regard to how that process went forward with the letter sent to us. It wasn't drafted and approved, it was just sent. According to the volunteers that are on that advisory board, they did not agree with that letter. So there's some thing we have to figure out with regard to how that was sent. It wasn't dated, there's no letterhead. It was sent by the chair. And so, yeah, there's just questions to it, so I'd like those answered as well. Thanks.
Ms. Dolan, can you refresh my memory? Was this a letter that we received last week? Okay, thank you.
Oh.
Ms. Shaw.
Thank you, Madam Chair. On that note, I would suggest that the volunteers there should be maybe a rebuttal, or, something could be written in rebuttal of that letter, rather than just, I don't know how else we would address it, to be honest. I'd rather have something in writing that we'd all get a chance to take a peek at. So I don't know if anybody can ask that group to do so. That would be, I think, a little better deal than just talking about it. Thanks.
Ms. Adams, I did not see an attachment to last week's minutes with a correspondence. Ms. Dolan, did you receive that correspondence? Can you forward it to Ms. Adams so it's included? I don't see it as attached to last week's minutes.
Excuse me, Madam Chair, but it came in so it would go with this week's minutes.
This week's, are you talking about the item that you just received? No.
I was talking about the letter from Josh O'Neill.
Okay.
That would go on this week's minutes
Okay.
as a correspondence that came in between our two
Between the
meetings.
two. Okay, thank you. Mr. Silk.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I would encourage all Study Commission members to go through and read the minutes of the fire advisory minutes. I was there in proponent of encouraging a volunteer coordinator. That is something that we're starting to implement through a Butte-Silver Fire Department safety program, which I'm very excited. I would like to talk to you guys, anyone, about it later on the progressiveness of that. There's some interesting conversation that happened for the fire advisory to come to a unanimous decision during that meeting. So not only talking to the chair, but also reading the minutes and reaching out to members that were at that meeting as well, to get a full understanding of why that letter was written. Thank you.
Thank you for the comment. And just for the good of the order, it was received on January 13th, and Ms. Adams, I have forwarded it to you so it can be included in this week's meeting notes. Ms. Dolan?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Chad. I think that's an excellent suggestion. I went through and I read the minutes of 2024 and 2025, and also I'm still waiting. I don't know if it's been posted with January 6 minutes yet. Is that the meeting you are alluding to for the minutes of the January 6th council for 2026? Last I saw last week, they haven't been posted, the minutes.
I believe it is I believe it was the only fire advisory meeting in January. So if that is it, then yeah. But before making any decisions or an opinion, just to make sure we have full context on probably why or when that letter was written. Thank you.
Have those minutes been posted? Do you know?
I'm
Okay.
sorry, I don't know.
Thank you.
Mr. Dennehy?
Madam Chair, so just to clarify things, we have the letter of January 13th from Josh O'Neill, formal statement from the Fire Advisory Board that was sent to us. So if that can be included in this week's minutes and the minutes of January 6th that we haven't received, that would be really important to review those minutes and to understand kind of the flow of the meeting to where this letter came out. So if we can maybe provide that to us in our next week's packet, that would be good. So I do have the letter from the Fire Advisory Board, but don't have the minutes. Thanks, Shanna.
And one more piece of correspondence was the information that Ms. Dolan received
Yes.
today that will also be included. All right. I thought that was the easy agenda item. All right. So is there any other discussion about correspondence? Okay, thank you. So moving on to our unfinished business, our director versus coordinator, manager positions, and working group update. I do have copies of the analysis that Cindy and I had completed. So if you need a copy, Ms. Adams has those to pass around. You received that analysis in your email. I've just added to it. We started with the other director positions, and I added to this this framework for you. In our review of the Civic Center director, or adding the Civic Center to the charter, Cindy and I were in agreement that we didn't feel that this particular department rises to the muster of being included in a charter language change. And so I give you the evaluation criteria that we walked through, and basically it comes down to there is a public process in place for the Civic Center, and that there's a board that's appointed by the chief executive. The Civic Center manager reports to that board, and those meetings are public, agendas are published, notes are published, so the public does have an opportunity to interact with that. Ms. Casey had made an excellent point a couple of weeks ago in regards to when do we become micromanagers by putting everything into the charter instead of allowing the executive to unfold its business as it sees fit. And basically that was where Ms. Shaw and I had landed in our evaluation criteria. So I'll turn it over to my co-conspirator in this particular question.
Well, I don't know what I could really add. That was very well done. Yeah, and actually, when I talked to Bill Melvin, I don't think he really, it was a matter of vernacular, just what to call a head of a department. And then the whole idea of department head is kind of the same thing, and it got a little bit muddled, and I do agree with Lori that we got to be careful not to micromanage, but to give him his due, he did ask that, and I do agree that there is a board. And I know Dan Callahan out there, he's on that board, and he can probably tell you probably more than we need to know, honestly. But anyway, I agree that we just, if it was already in the charter, like in some cases where it's in the charter, we can just make a small change. But to actually put it in there, other departments that aren't in there might wonder why suddenly we chose one over another to have in the charter. So I agree, and I think they do a great job, and I think their board is very active, so that would be my consensus as well.
Discussion from other commission members. Ms. McCormick.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First of all, I really would like to thank you and Cindy for the work that you did on this. I mean, this table is just great. It's wonderful to read through it and, help you clarify your ideas. I thank Lori Casey for initiating that evaluation criteria earlier with another working group. But I agree with your recommendation that this Civic Center hasn't been mentioned in the charter. There isn't anything that we need to remedy to make sure that it can, you know, maybe be a change in the future, but we don't have to direct that. So I really appreciate the hard work you did on this, and I think you've made a really good, strong recommendation.
Thank you, Ms. McCormick. Any other comments on this issue? Okay, so to be clear, we will include a discussion of our findings and add these evaluation criteria in our report, but we will not be recommending this for a ballot initiative or something to carry forward. All right, our coroner working group update.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I left everyone on everyone's desk a handout. Let me refer to that. So we had a lot of testimony from the sheriff. We had testimony from Dan Haggerty, a former sheriff coroner out of Jefferson County, just for educational purposes because we don't have a sheriff coroner in Butte-Silver Bow. So wanted to get his knowledge and feedback and edification of that position, and so we got that from Dan as well. We talked to Jason Parrish. I don't so say we. I spoke with Jason Parrish, and sadly, I feel like I've kind of Matt, Ben, and myself are on the working group. The three of us are also on the fire group, so we've been doing a lot with fires. So we're trying to gather this together, and I've had some great help from Jason Parrish, the coroner, and I also reached out to Sheriff's Department employee, and I apologize, I don't know his rank, Jeff Williams, who works with the Sheriff's Department. He was very helpful, along with Sheriff Lester. So in talking with all of them, possibilities for 3 different options. Option one, keep coroner as a separate department. Require some qualifications in the charter. Jason will have input on that. Coroner is also, and this is just the second 2 bullets are just informational because they would not be in the charter, so to speak. The coroner is developing a work manual that will help his work and the work of deputy coroners. Also work to obtain accreditation and additional certifications. That's something he is also working on. And the question of full or part-time is still out. Right now, if without the study commission, it goes through the chief executive, J.P. Gallagher first, and then the council of commissioners. But that is something that we can discuss with regard to the coroner's office. Option 2, a bit different than the sheriff/coroner position. It would put it would put the coroner under the sheriff's department as an employee, have officers sworn in as deputy coroners to help when they are on shift, may need additional evaluation because there are concerns about time, pay, coverage when a death happens, and officers who may or may not be on patrol would be taken off that patrol. So those are some concerns with option 2. And then option 3, sheriff coroner position and melding into the sheriff's responsibilities, would assume the duties as coroner and will have staff as deputy coroners when on duty. This job would require Montana Department of Criminal Investigation to come in if there's a death where the sheriff needs to recuse him or herself. And right now, state law says that the only person in the county who can arrest a sheriff who has done nefarious things is the coroner. So there's some conflict of interest there that would require outside intervention. So that's what the possible path forward looks like. And if I'm able, I gladly answer any questions.
Ms. Casey?
Thank you, Madam Chair. In option number 1, where you say keep coroner as a separate department, are you meaning keeping it as an elected position? And then I have a follow-up to that question.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Lori. So yes, it would be still the same. It would have to have that addendum to it because another option would be status quo, and that would be an elected. But under option 1, it would stay an elected position because option 2 says it would go under the sheriff's department as an employee, if that makes sense.
Thank you. Follow-up, Madam Chair? My question is, are we able to put qualifications on an elected position, and if so, in the charter, and if so, who would review those? Because would you have to have those qualifications before you can sign up to run for that position? I guess I just was trying to understand how that working would go.
Ms. Casey, if I may, I would direct that to the County Attorney Enruth.
Thank you.
Section 7-3-708 of the Montana Code annotated states, charter forms are subject to state laws establishing election, initiative, and referendum procedures. So we are subject to the state laws with regard to the election procedures of a coroner and their qualifications. Just read it. I was just peeling through things as you guys were asking questions, and there it was. So yes, I don't think you can add any additionals to it. It's just what is required by state law.
Ms. Dolan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, County Attorney. Can you tell us then, would it be advisable to take the qualifications that are stated in state law and put them in our charter, or does that get too specific to Lori's point? Is that something we can do? Because I remember you mentioning it when we had our working group meeting about the fact that the qualifications are stated in state law.
Commissioner, Chairwoman Brandel, Commissioner Dolan, because it's already started, our charter states that we follow the state law with regards to the coroner, so it'd be redundant. I mean, you could put them in if you wanted to, but it states that's what we do.
I'll take Ms. McCormick and then Ms. Shaw, please.
I spent some time looking back over what Sheriff Lester said and what Jason Parrish said, and you know, this whole thing has been precipitated by a horrible event. But I think my feeling after looking at over everything, I think we should keep the status quo. It should remain elected position. You know, I was very, very impressed with Jason Parrish, as I'm sure you all were. And I would say when an election comes up, that elected official should be out there campaigning on their qualifications. And if we had another election and Jason was running, I think everyone would vote for him because he has such great credentials and he's got a good plan forward. Certainly, what I really liked about him was talking about developing some training and criteria, and I think that could be in there, but let the public decide.
Thank you, Ms. McCormick. Ms. Shaw?
Thank you, Madam Chair. County Attorney Enruth, I'm just wondering, I know there are certain departments, elected officials, that are required to do continuing education on an annual basis. I know that is required by some of our elected officials, and I don't know if the coroner, if that is possibly part of their requirements as they proceed in their job. Thank you.
Chairwoman Brandel, Commissioner Shaw, yes, that is actually part of their job. They're required to do the continuing legal education requirements, continuing whatever education requirements. I do believe Mr. Parrish, when he came up here and did his interview and all of that, actually stated that he would be doing them if elected this past December. So that happens once a year, so that way they have the requisite qualifications under statute.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Dolan?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Cindy, for that question, because in talking with Jason Parrish today, he said not only he does the continuing education, but he wants to make that available with he's done some outreach with several groups and associations that do accreditation and certifications, so he can do them, but not only him, but also the deputy coroners as well, to get them up to speed. So that was a good piece of information. Thanks.
Other comments? Mr. Steppen?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think that, and Cindy and I have had good conversation about this and how it's ebbed and flowed our opinions over time. And I think, Mary, you hit it on the head. I think that early on I was of an opinion that placing it under the sheriff provided us the most protection. And then after hearing Mr. Parrish, I felt much more comfortable with the person that was in the role. And I think in our working group meeting Tuesday night that the county attorney was part of, he brought up a good point that good personnel, bad personnel, it can happen within any department, right? And so I also think about the opinions that we heard from the sheriff, who wasn't particularly excited about the idea of it potentially going under his office. And so I think that there's value in addition to what's likely to be a heavy lift in some areas based on other work this commission and the county commissioners might be doing at the tail end of the study commission, that this may be one that's left best alone, is my opinion.
Mr. Dennehy.
Madam Chair, I would agree with Matt and his assessment. We heard from the sheriff, he wasn't excited about putting coroner under his jurisdiction. Again, listening to Jason, I thought he was well-versed and had some experience. And so with those things in mind, I would opt for option one, keeping it the same as elected position and not touching it as part of our working assessment, because I agree we have some other issues that we need to talk about and probably debate. So thank you.
Ms. Dolan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Not wanting to put my personal opinion in, but I did want to mention, and I agree, I think that option one is a great way to go. I just wanted to ask the county attorney, if we would go with option one, would it be something where we could put on a recommendation list or add language that fortifies the state law requirements of the job positions and just a couple tweaks to add some strength to the framework for Mr. Parrish to work towards in what he's doing currently? Because I agree, I think he's doing a good assessment of the office, making changes where he can as soon as possible. And so if we can at all help with not just, and we had this conversation earlier today, Mr. Parrish agreed that not just for him, because to Matt's point, people change over time. And so if we're looking 10, 20 years ahead, if we can do a nice framework for anybody else in the future having that position, if anything we can do to help would be great. So what do you suggest, Mr. County Attorney?
Chairman Brandel, Commissioner Dolan, I think it would be, best as a recommendation to the council. Couple of reasons. One, I think that the topics that this council intends on putting on the ballot are going to be complicated enough. And, in going through, some recent emails and things of some other counties that went through adding stuff to their charters, one of the reoccurring themes through all of that was simpler is better, especially when it comes to people being able to vote. So I think that would best be recommended as best put forth as a recommendation to the current council, or what council may be in effect there for their recommendations to add through ordinance and things like that.
Ms. Shaw.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So if I understand right, on option one, we've already decided that qualifications are already in state law, so that would come out of there. And I don't really see any other thing that we'd put in the charter in option one, because it's already listed as one of the many other elected officials. But am I right assuming that we probably would not have to make any charter changes to implement this?
I believe, Ms. Shaw, that's what County Attorney also affirmed, is that no charter changes and make recommendations to council in regards to helping frame out what the department might look like according to state law and all the procedures that Mr. Parrish had started to implement. Is there other comments? Okay, all right. From the chair, I would say I agree consistently with everybody that one unfortunate event doesn't mean that we should change our structure. And, bad things happen to good people. And we have to trust the electorate to do their job, to investigate who they are electing and know the qualifications of that person. So I too would agree that keeping as is provides both that transparency that we're looking for because we have separated the coroner from the sheriff's office, and it also ensures that voters have a method of removing a coroner if they so choose. And so I think staying with the form is a good course of action. So I don't think we need a vote at this moment. We'll include the analysis documents in our preliminary report, but we'll keep as is unless there's other discussion or anybody is dissenting. All right. All right, fire departments.
Thank you, Madam Chair. What you see up on the screen, and I have printed copies if that's something that anyone prefers. I did. Send a few that way. I'm not sure if Shannon. I'm not sure if it's worth placing in the back for if anybody wants a printed copy from the audience. Oh, you printed. Oh, excellent. So I want to just kind of set the table on this presentation and how we came to this and what the goal of our working group is coming out of this meeting and going forward. Throughout our deliberations and conversations, which are still ongoing, and I think that's central to this conversation tonight. We still have conversations scheduled for tomorrow with union leadership, and expect that this presentation, amongst other things, is going to help us with deliberations as we move forward as well, hearing the feedback from tonight. When we had a recent meeting, I think it was Tuesday, our working group in the county attorney's office, because as a group, we found ourselves asking the question, regardless of the options that we were considering, do we feel comfortable as a working group that we understand what options are legally defensible and what are not? And so we felt like before I don't want to say pick a path, but before we were ready to bring options to this group, we felt that it was very important to meet with the county attorney to share where we were at and to make sure that before we put things into a report, that they were options that we felt as a county were legal. In that meeting, I would say we came with 2 options and left with 3. And as we go through this, 2 of these options are things that we've talked about in this forum. 1 we have not. And there's a lot of layers to each of these options, which is why another reason why we felt compelled to bring multiple options to this group and ask this group to help with the formulation of that final recommendation. And so, having said that, we'll jump in. It's not a long presentation, and it may be in everyone's best interest to go through the presentation and then answer questions as opposed to along the way, if everybody feels comfortable with that. And so, this issue matters because fire services governance in Butte-Silver Bow has been marked by longstanding ambiguity. There are conflicting interpretations of the charter and state law, and that ambiguity has contributed to uncertainty and tension over time. Go ahead, next slide. One of the core responsibilities of the study commission is to look for opportunities to improve governance clarity, and I think that's important. The charter review is the appropriate mechanism for this process. Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Matt, I don't know, is this screen on the stream a full screen that people can see if they're streaming on YouTube? Because if not, you might want to articulate the bullets.
Okay.
If it's not, but if it is, then they can just read it. Yeah,
Okay.
so that might be helpful.
Maybe I'll just roll through the bullets. And my tightly crafted verbal will just go to the garbage. So I can stutter through the rest of it. Perfect. Fantastic. Thank you, Cindy. All right, where are we at? Are we good to? Okay. The role of the study commission is to recommend charter changes with the goal of improving structure, clarity, and accountability, to identify options, consequences, and trade-offs, and to enable informed decision-making. I think that from a process perspective, what makes this topic unique to other ones that we have managed through is this is not a form of government conversation that requires one option to be placed in front of the voters, with the second option being status quo. Because it's not a form of government question, we can and maybe should have multiple options that go onto the preliminary report and potentially all the way to the ballot. And so I think that if it looks like this group was taking the task, and if your hope was for us to come back with a singular recommendation, we felt that the four of us, what's best for this conversation is to bring the options that we've brought to this point to the commission, and then together decide what steps we take from here, which is consistent with study commission authority. So from a legal context, we believe, based on conversation with the county attorney, that all three options that we're going to share tonight are legally available. That doesn't mean that all details, depending on some of those as these are fleshed out. It's not to say that all legal questions have been answered, might be the best way to say it. Each option offers different risk, complexity, and outcomes. I think it's important to mention that we are a long way, and it'll take a long time for us to understand the potential outcomes based on decisions. And I think that we feel that precision in the charter drafting is going to be critical to addressing issues that have been long-standing over time. So with that, I think I've just tried to kind of set the table on the three options. The way that these options are going to be presented are in three stages: explaining what the options are, what the key implications to each of those options are, and if this option were to be selected by the voters, what we may expect from needed processes going forward. First option, one that has been presented to this group throughout these proceedings, and that's removing volunteers from the charter. That would place volunteer governed exclusively by state statute. Career departments would stay in the charter. It clarifies the independence under state law. The implications of that: it would help remove the ambiguity by providing clear separation of governance. It would require the volunteers to develop their own funding. Oversight of the volunteers would come from state law, and there'd be the need to resolve asset and land ownership under that separation. If this option were ultimately selected by the voters, and some of this is just reiterating, but the volunteers would be independent under state law. There would need to be resolution of asset and land ownership. There would need to be the development of mutual aid and coordination agreements between all entities. and the establishment of independent funding mechanisms. Okay, option 2. This is not one that's been discussed in this forum. This was one that came out of our Tuesday conversation with the county attorney as an additional option that we hadn't yet considered. But this would be the creation of one unified volunteer fire department in the charter. That would create one volunteer fire department in the charter. It could result in potential consolidation of existing volunteer departments and the establishment of a unified volunteer voice. Key implications: it's legally permissible and complex. It requires a governance restructuring, and it raises questions regarding governance and leadership structure under state law that are currently being reviewed by the county attorney. In particular, I think to be specific about that, it's the idea of it doesn't necessarily answer the question on authority and whether or not you can have 2 chiefs under one fire jurisdiction. Am I stating that correctly? Okay. If selected by the voters, option 2, consolidation of existing volunteer departments into a single entity, a redefinition of volunteer governance, leadership, and bylaws, and the adoption of ordinances and transition plans to implement the new structure. Okay. Option 3, affirm authority of the Director of Fire Services with the addition of a volunteer fire coordinator. Under this option, the volunteers would be retained in the charter. There would be one Director of Fire Services for career and volunteer departments. And we would add a volunteer fire coordinator as the liaison to the volunteers and the single point of contact to the Director of Fire Services. The key implications under option 3, it would affirm the Director of Fire Services as the authority over career and volunteer fire services, and this is subject to confirmation of compliance with state law currently under legal review. It would maintain a unified fire services structure within the city county government, would create a formal mechanism for volunteer input through memorialization of a volunteer fire coordinator position in the charter, and would require follow-up ordinances to define roles, processes, and expectations for that position. So if selected by the voters, it would create a volunteer fire coordinator position with the drafting and adoption of ordinances to define those roles and responsibilities. Some shared constraints and realities. I think it's important to recognize that charter changes alone won't resolve all of the issues. Ordinances will be required regardless of direction. Each option involves trade-offs. And I saw this statement and I think it spoke to me. No option is self-executing, right? This presentation is intended as an update and discussion of framework only. It's not a proposal for final language. There's still much work to be done based on the direction this commission intends to go. There will be time for further legal clarification, refinement, and deliberation. But I think the question before the commission is which governance structures best serve Butte-Silver Bow and which options should be presented to the voters for consideration.
Thank you, Mr. Steppen, and thank you to the study subcommittee. We appreciate your work, and this has been a definite heavy lift. And I know that Mr. Thielen is returning from work, and so also please pass on my thanks to him. I have a question right out the get-go, and it was regarding the affirmation of many questions that we might be able to bring to voters, and I want to direct that to County Attorney Enruth, because we were looking at possible ballot language related to the city manager and commission structure, and I think we're still unresolved as to the number of questions. Am I correct, Mr. Enruth, or do you feel that we could bring more that aren't structural changes, that are rather amendments to charter?
Chairwoman Brandel, I'm confident at this time, unless I get told otherwise, that we are able to bring additional questions that are not part of the structure or governance, part of the structure of government or the form of government. And when you look at the commission or the statutes, those all talk about commission CEO, commission mayor, commission and council, they use interchangeably. Any of those, that's what those relate to, charter form. So yes, I do believe at this time, these are questions outside of a government structure. It's not talking about partisan or nonpartisan elections as part of the government, terms and years of commissioners or appointed officials or things like that. I do believe that these are still outside of that.
Excellent. Thank you for that clarification. And back to the subcommittee or the working group, Ms. Dolan or Mr. Steppen, if you could answer for me. I know that the option of removing the volunteers from the charter completely has been proposed by the volunteer departments. And I just wonder, as we've done our work and our homework, and we've been looking at all of the possible dominoes that there could be from removing those volunteer departments from the charter, has there been discussion with the volunteer departments on those domino effects? And can you maybe speak to that a little bit?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, I've had numerous discussions with volunteers. I've gone to several fire council meetings of the chiefs that are involved with the fire department, with the volunteers, and they are, with the email I got today, they are 100% behind the removal of the volunteers from the charter. They understand, and that was actually my go-to question was, are you all on board understanding what that entails of you to do to lift that up if you are removed from the charter? And they are willing and able to do that, with the caveat of knowing that if it's removed from the charter, then the ball is in their court to figure out what the structure is going to look like, because they'll have to have some real serious conversations about consolidation. There are a couple volunteer stations that are a lot smaller, and we talked about this in our working group meeting with the county attorney, and they are well aware of some of these issues, and this is the option that they like the best. I don't think I'm speaking out of turn to say that from what we've got. What we got this afternoon from the volunteers was language from the state law, and if there was a remove from the charter, how they would go forward. So I think they're they are in favor of option one.
Okay. I will defer to other questions for further deliberations within the commission. I just had that one right off the top of my head. So, Mr. Silk.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm not going to exhaust everyone tonight on debating back and forth, but I'm truly going to try to understand after all of you guys' input that you've received and just ask some basic questions. And one of those basic questions is removing volunteers from the charter means that some volunteers that don't have a good following, that don't have a lot of members, and aren't able to respond to calls, I imagine those districts would somewhat dissolve or be taken in by someone, right? What now, and I don't know what that looks like. I don't know if a dissolving of a fire district goes back to the city county or where that district goes. Where is that response area? Who has the responsibility of that response area? My main question gets to, again, I've asked this question over and over with no input, is how much money is the community going to have to pay above and beyond what they're currently paying for fire services to fund a volunteer organization? That's one of my main questions.
Ms. Dolan?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, it's interesting. I had a conversation over the weekend about that very question, so I appreciate that question, Chad, very much. I think it boils down to being autonomous and what happens with that, but more importantly, I think it's for the county to look at fire funds are separate from EMS funds, and the EMS fund is a lot of that. I think 90% of that goes to wages and salary, or wages for the fire department out of the EMS budget. And so I think we need to take a total look at what that looks like. So I think, for me, that's something we can punt to the Council of Commissioners, because like we've said all along, we have the decisions that we make have consequences. Some are monetary, some are structural, some are, things that need to be changed in ordinance and things like that. So I think that's where they're coming from. But I think the biggest issue is taking them out of the charter will suffice the state law and will hopefully not go to litigation. But of course, that's not our concern. Our concern, like you always say, and I repeat all the time, which I really like, is how can we set Butte up for success? And if this is an option that does that, great, but we also have to look at all the other options too. I hope that answered your question. Maybe it didn't, but a little bit of context.
Mr. Steppen?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't know that we as a commission can answer that question, Chad. I think that part of, and I don't know what we can do to better answer that question other than having the needed research and debate over a public process to determine if this is going to go onto a ballot, right? I don't know if that makes sense, and I'm not trying to kick the can, but there's a lot of unknowns that we won't be able to answer, like which neighborhoods would be okay with the potential to have an additional levy on their taxes, right? And I don't think we're in a position to speculate on that as well. But in some respects, we almost have to bring this to the public to get those questions answered. And that could be at the vote, at the ballot box. I don't know. I don't know I agree with Cindy that this is the preferred option of the volunteers based on our conversation. And I think, not to speak for the other members, but it seems to be the only option that they're truly interested in when we ask those questions about what from our purview would benefit the work that you do. And this was kind of the beginning and ending point from their feedback.
And that's enough. Ms. Shaw?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Cindy, for what you've been doing and kind of being the boots on the street with the volunteers and giving us the feedback. So I always try to get back to the basics, I guess, but we need to comply with state law, and I also hope the volunteers really are. I mean, there'd be quite a lot of things to do and a big heavy lift, as we like to say, to make that work with the volunteers in the state that they're in now. I mean, back in the day when they had a lot more people, a lot more things like that. But I am more concerned about, number one, trying to level the playing field, give more of an opportunity for the volunteers to speak for themselves and have good representation amongst themselves. But it's a heavy lift as far as trying to get funding. You got the whole thing about districting, tax. We found out that they can't be double taxed. That would not happen. Thank God. And we kind of cleared that one up, I believe, in our meeting with Mr. Enruth. But, being in compliance with the state law, talking to their attorney, Kate, and going back again to all these years that we have not been in compliance in our charter with the state, and it was getting like really critical, looking like it might end up in litigation. I'm not saying that's the only reason to do something like this, but it's an option, and it is up to the voters. And like Matt said, we don't do a lot more than just making a very clear recommendation and options. We could put all three options out there to let the voters decide. And then from that point on, other than our transition report, it's kind of like, we're right out of the picture. And so, the county is going to have to do a lot at the Council of Commissioners level, the executive level, whatever. But it is an option. It's option one. We've got two others. So, but again, this one, to me, aside from anything else, it brings us back into compliance, which we never were, other than before consolidation, to be in compliance with state law. So, and maybe Matt Enruth is going to tell me I'm wrong. Thanks.
County Attorney Enruth.
Chairwoman Brendel, I'm not going to say that you're wrong. I'm just going to say that there are two different opinions right now. One of them being that the Butte-Silver County Charter isn't in compliance with the state law, which is the volunteers' position. The county's position being that no, that is what was passed, I believe, in 1996, and that it is in compliance with state law, particularly when you look at the statute that states that volunteer fire departments are not basically, their existence cannot be, terminated or dissolved or modified unless by charter. Butte-Silver County's charter does do that. The one thing it did not do specifically by charter was state that Butte-Silver County had authority over their budget, which is where that Attorney General opinion comes in. And I believe the volunteers' position is that the county doesn't have authority over their budget pursuant to that, and because it's not contained in charter. So it's not necessarily that the county is not in compliance with state law. It's simply that there are two different opinions right now that at some point may have to be determined by a court.
Ms. Dolan?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Matt, could you explain what you explained to us at our meeting in the working group? And I thought it was a great explanation because I needed that explanation, and I saw Chad's look, so I think you have the same question. Can you explain to us why it's not going, if they were to be removed from the charter, the volunteers, why it wouldn't be double taxation? That question, and how you answered that in our working group was very good. So I hope you remember what you said, because I don't, but it was good.
So there are currently some Montana Supreme Court cases out there with regards to cities and counties on a double taxation issue. A lot of them are related specifically to roads. But what the Supreme Court broke it down into was the type of services being provided. So when you look at the statutes, particularly 7-33-2109, taxing, levying, debt incurrence, bond, that specifically states that our County of Commissioners has the right to levy taxes for a rural fire district. When you go back into the volunteer section, it also states that the powers and duties of trustees can levy special taxes, and that those monies levied shall be submitted into the county treasurer's to the county treasurer and then sent back to that area. So there's the ability of both individuals to tax the same district. The reason it is not double taxation, in my opinion, I believe this is in accordance with the Montana Supreme Court case law, is the services that are being provided are different. Volunteer firefighter services, from my understanding, a lot of them don't have the same qualifications as the county firefighters do, or what we'll call career firefighters, with regards to being able to enter homes or EMS services or things like that. Volunteers provide a different type of service. While some of those services may be provided by career firefighters as well, I think that's the distinction, is it is not double taxation due to the two different types of services that are being provided. And I believe that would be in accordance with state law as well.
Working group, when you guys were visiting with the volunteers, did they have a working idea of how much budget they would need for each firehouse, or was that Ms. Dolan?
Thank you, Madam Chair. We didn't get into those conversations because that's kind of out of our purview with regard to how they set things up. It mainly was and correct me if I'm wrong, but when we had our working lunch, as we've done with other groups, it was just giving them that autonomy to make those decisions. So I don't have an answer for you of specifics.
Not a problem. I just was wondering if that was, how far along in thinking about setting up that special tax district or fire district they are, in the structure and how to get this done, and I was digging into how to do this. They'd have to go through the process that's outlined in state law, which includes notification and publication and a letter to everybody in their tax district boundaries and gaining 40% approval by those people that would be levied those taxes. And that's, as you very eloquently both said, it's not our job to do that work or imagine if that work could be done. My question is just really, are we as a commission and recommending pulling them from the charter, setting them up for failure? Or are we setting them up for success? And, there's a lot of work to be done in order to make that happen. Ms. Dolan.
Sorry, Madam Chair. Yeah, that's a great point. And I think with the volunteers that work with not only themselves and the attorney they have working with them, they're also working with other volunteers across the state and learning from them. And this is what I've garnered from my many conversations with them of what those structures look like. What does the financial impacts look like? What does consolidation look like? So all of these questions, they're continually getting information from other fire departments to get a clear understanding of how that path would look if the voters were to look at option one. So that's kind of where I think they're at. I don't want to speak for them, but that's kind of what I've understood.
Yeah, I would assume that they've done their homework and they're feeling prepared. But again, I keep going back to our job, in what we bring forward. And ultimately, I do think that public comment and, bringing this back to getting opinion from our voters is important. And I have lots of hands, so I'll start with Mr. Steppen and then I'll go to Mr. Dennehy if that's okay.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think with respect to that question, I think another public survey that we expect to have, that would be a great question in the public survey, is how do you feel about the potential of an additional tax in your district for fire services? And I don't want to, whatever that language sounds like, but that seems like a mechanism to get that information and inform which path we're likely headed down. And the other thing that I'll just mention quickly, and I should have when I set the table, these three options are in no particular order when we say option one versus option three, but not within the committee or it wasn't intended to put a ranking order. I think that's important to put on the record.
Thank you. Mr. Dennehy.
Madam Chair, first of all, thank you very much, Subcommittee Working Group, for providing us with a foundation to look at options. But as I hear people talk tonight, we are asking the voters of this community to pick whatever options or a hybrid of options without all the information. How much is this going to cost? Where are the districts going to be? What does a consolidation of volunteer fire department from 9 or 11 to 1 looks like? Even though it's not our job, we are going to provide that
as a resolution or a ballot to the people of this community. And I don't know that. I get the options, it's great. There's a lot of fill-in on these options. So to say, well, that's not our responsibility, I think it is our responsibility to at least give a portion or an idea to the voters of what this means. What does it mean that we have one volunteer fire department, and how much does it cost? What does it mean that the volunteer fire department are deleted from the charter? I guess Matt would have to tell us a little bit about that. But to say that we have a lot of answers yet to come up with means that we have a lot of answers yet to come up here before we say, here's the ballot measure. Hey, what do you think? So if I had to, and the options are fantastic, but we have to fill in the blanks. This is not where you send to the voters on a very limited amount of knowledge. And so I want to make sure that we understand that we need to fill in the blanks, that we have to answer those important questions. Because if I'm on my district and I'm paying for the career fire department to come put out my fire, how much am I going to be charged for the volunteer fire department to come and put out my fire too? Or we are, and I guess, Matt, you're saying there's no such thing as dual taxation, but maybe a lot of people don't understand that, and I think we need to clarify that question and a number of questions. And we don't have the note that you got today or a memo. That's important too.
Yeah, Mr. Dennehy, thank you for those comments. And I think that was the intention of the working group, is to have us start deliberating and thinking about what questions we would need to answer with any of those options. And I have a functional question for the ballot itself, because as I understand the ballot, it has to be written in, you vote for this option or retain the existing language in the charter. And so if we are offering 3 options, that seems confusing to me, that it would be removing from the charter or keeping them in the charter, but then it could be, I don't know. I guess tell me where you're going with that. Whoever wants to answer on that, you both have your finger up.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Of course, I'll go first because I'm just pushy that way. But no, just kidding. Dan, I think, Mr. Denny, your questions are totally valid. In using Cindy's terms, this is like the first blush. This is the first attack of this very heavy issue with lots of components. So I totally agree with you. We're trying to drill this down so people can get educated on what this will look like, filling in a lot of blanks that we still have. And so I think this is just the first run at trying to drill it down to some possible options. But I think with regard to your question, Raylan, about how it will look on the ballot, I think clearly when you have a ballot initiative, it says, do you want this or do you want this? Usually, either or. But if you're something so that will affect our community so much, that to give them a couple options or the status quo, because this is so big and has been gone on for decades and decades and decades without any kind of clear resolution, that I think a couple of options and then the status quo are valid for this ballot issue. If it's acceptable, and it sounds like from the county attorney, it is acceptable to have multiple options for this particular ballot issue.
Mr. Steppen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I believe it gets to it is not a form of government question, so we have more options in the question itself. And to speak to Commissioner Dennehy's comments, I totally agree, but I think that's also true for everything that we're talking about and working on right now. If someone were to ask, what's the cost of full-time commissioners versus part-time? It's to be determined. And we have the next however long to try and drill that down. If they ask what the redistricting looks like for that commissioners, we don't have answers to those questions yet either. I acknowledge that scale is probably much different with this question. I just don't think we can answer those questions. A timeline is part of this, right? We are committed to a preliminary report with the information that we have. And then the next public portion of this process better include these conversations. And it's not just incumbent upon us. It's incumbent upon the constituents and the interested parties to do that as well.
Thank you, Mr. Steppen. I'm going to step through the options one by one, and then maybe we can deliberate each of them. But in option one, we've kind of been stuck on this one a little bit, but you said that the implementation considerations were volunteer departments are independent under state law. There's that resolution of asset and land ownership, which I believe is probably a very big sticking point in terms of you're talking about the buildings and the equipment, correct? Yeah. And then development of mutual aid and coordination agreements between the entities and establishment of independent funding mechanisms. And that fourth bullet is kind of what I alluded to before. Like, are we setting up our volunteers for failure in that district is not able to get formed because they don't get the 40% approval from voters within that district to add an additional levy? So I think in our report, we need to spell out those considerations very clearly. Are there other implementation considerations or questions that this commission has right now that we could maybe add to this list? Mr. Steppen.
I don't know if it's to be added, but maybe an understanding when we talk about asset and land ownership. Can our county attorney shed some light on what the baseline is on that? What's the starting point?
On who owns what? Is that the question? I wouldn't say here. I don't have the documents in front of me. The last that I can remember is Butte-Silver County owns most of the buildings and apparatuses. The volunteers do own some themselves, but without the list in front of me, I can't tell you. I can tell you it is divided, though.
Mr. Silk?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I believe that there is a Montana Supreme Court ruling from 2021 and 22 that probably would allow us some guidance, I guess, not speaking for the county attorney, but the divvying up of the resource allocation just sounds like that in itself, to me, is going to be a fight and a battle. Especially after volunteers work so hard to get some equipment, get grants, and then have them matched through Butte-Silver or themselves. But then also the equipment or the property's title and equipment's title in the name of the Butte-Silver Fire Department, recognizing us again as one, and splitting up those resources. What I can do is, I don't know if I've sent that Supreme Court ruling to read through, but that might offer some insight. I know that Madam Chair asked for that a long time ago, and I can't remember if I did or did not send that. My concern with this option one is just the survivability of some volunteer departments. And I know and I appreciate so much that the working group has met with selected members within the volunteers, but I know for a fact, after talking with some and hearing them, that there's a lot of volunteers who want nothing to do with running their own budgets. They want nothing to do with increasing the taxes within their district. They just want to do firefighter things. Butte-Silver affords that opportunity to do that by making that happen. There was a chief within a volunteer department that left his department because of inactivity within the district trustees. I spoke with 2 district trustees that said they haven't had a district trustee meeting in years. So this is a huge burden, as Madam Chair has said, of when you have to follow state law, you have to follow state law to a T. So I think we need to look a little bit more into, and I really appreciate the options, and I think we can narrow these down. But these are facts. These are people with documented emails, trustees that have been said over and over that are voted on by the people. But it's hard for a volunteer to not only do training and establish the standards, but to do all of these extra things as well. Some departments can do it. I guarantee it. They'll crush it, and they do a great job. We appreciate that. Some departments don't. So to me, it's not a one-size-fits-all solution. And I'm kind of going off on a tangent here, but the survivability of volunteers in option 1 definitely needs to be looked at. And although a select group of volunteers has been talked to, there's 140 of them out there that might not all agree with that too. But they get the option to do it when they go ahead to the ballot. And I totally get that and understand that. So I'll go ahead and end it with that on my implications and considerations along with the additional tax on option 1.
Thank you, Mr. Silk. Ms. Dolan?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Chad, for that. I would just say survivability. I mean, we've been doing this for months and months and months. The volunteers have really stuck a flag in the sand with regard to getting out of the charter and to rectify the consternation of charter versus state law and what a remedy looks like. And you're absolutely right. Not everyone's going to agree. And you have 140 volunteers and you have 9 different stations. But I think the volunteers are very aware of that, and they have told our working group that they are well aware that there are some that have never haven't had trustee meetings for years. They're so small that they don't take calls, and they can easily be enveloped in other stations. And that goes to the point of, well, what will that look like? What will the new district look like? And so, and it's the same kind of what you were talking about earlier with the Fire Advisory Board. That's a group of volunteers, career, and commissioners, and they're all not going to agree, but they come to a consensus. And I think the same can be said of the volunteers coming to some kind of consensus to come up with a plan they think will work for them and to bring to the voter as an option for the ballot. And again, it goes to Mr. Steppen's point of, this is the starting point. We have a lot of information to gather. We have a lot of questions to answer, and we have a lot of education to do ourselves with other folks and with the public before they get to the ballot box on November of 26.
Okay, if I could direct our deliberations again, any other comments or concerns off the top of our head as we see option 1 presented? If not, I'd like to move into option 2 and have us think through that and imagine if there were one unified volunteer fire department. And I guess you said create one volunteer fire department in the charter. Would that include those truly rural outlying districts of, Divide and Melrose and maybe Rocker and Ramsey? I guess I direct that question at the working group, or if that was, or maybe Mr. County Attorney was. It was just, I think this might have been your idea as well.
Chairman Brendel, Commissioners, this is the most complicated of the 3, and it kind of came about with regards. I'm gonna throw Commissioner Thielen under the bus. It's all him, because he was talking about having the possibility of 2 fully distinct departments with chiefs in both of them. After further research, I do not think it's plausible I don't think it's in accordance with state law to have 2 chiefs. The municipality laws are clear. We shall have 1 chief. But that's if the fire department is created, by the council under a charter. So what this would look like or entail is essentially getting rid of the volunteer departments and then restarting them over with new districts, through the volunteer process. That's why it's the most complicated. It's a very long and tedious process if it were to happen. And then so you would go through, and present to the commission, if 40% of the landowners in that area wanted the, volunteer department, it would go to the commission. And it's possible, but I think it's very, very long, and it'd be a very difficult and very heavy lift. The thought process on it was that it's possible, and it gave that option of still a volunteer department under charter control, with a career department still there, and then different districts, new districts drawn for the volunteers areas, such as those outlying areas, the Rockers, Rocker, Melrose, Terra Verde, Walkerville. It's possible, but it's a huge lift, and it's a lot of work to get that done. The kind of back end of that is the option 3, which you already have the volunteer groups, but clarifying the charter. But this was possible to do as well.
Ms. Dolan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I presented option 2 to the volunteers I spoke with, and they're in very rudimentary terms, because we're waiting for the county attorney to come up with a decision with regard to those 2 chiefs idea, and even if that was legal. And so it was very much here's option 2, pretty much unified volunteer fire department, and that's basically all I gave as information, because I didn't want to give information that was incorrect. And so just from that initial brush of just generalities of option 2, the input I got was they didn't think that would work, and that was not an option they were looking towards. And to County Attorney Enruth's point, it's a huge heavy lift. So with that, but we have to know more, but I think it's almost a moot point at this point, because if the 2 chiefs are not legal, then I don't know how we move forward.
And realistically, it was a working group. Like, we were trying to come up with a possible compromise. And once I got further into how our fire department is established and the municipal laws that they follow, it's clear that you have one chief in command, which is where I believe the option 3 developed into.
Okay, so are there any other comments or questions on option 2 from the commission? Okay, so moving on to option 3, to affirm the authority of the Director of Fire Services and adding a volunteer coordinator. Questions or thoughts in this option, and then looking also again at our key implications and implementation considerations, questions that we might have. Mr. Steppen.
Yep, if I can provide a little bit of context to that. What that option was, or a similar option, was kind of the initial option that I presented to our working group as a starting point, was clearing up the ambiguity behind the authority through revised charter language that would hopefully take us out of this loop between charter and state law. And so it was very important to work with the county attorney to find out if that's possible. The addition of the volunteer fire coordinator actually came out of our working group meeting with the Director of Fire Services, Osborne, when we were discussing the idea of if this direction were to affirm the authority of the director, how do we create that formalized seat at the table for the volunteers? And he offered this as a potential solution. This was a recommendation that came out of the fire study that was done. And so it was actually his idea to memorialize it in the charter so that it lives in perpetuity, or until 10 years from now when the next dummies are up here having these conversations. But So that's the context on that position. The way that I've framed it in this option, because words matter. This is a volunteer position selected by the volunteer contingent to serve as that singular voice of the volunteers and the singular point of contact to the director. And so that's the background on that option in 3.
Thank you. Ms. Dolan?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just add to that, thank you, Matt, that was a good explanation, and what we're trying to gather from everybody that we're talking to. But I would say, as an addendum to that, this option 3 still does not solve the question of overall authority. Because even if you're adding a volunteer fire coordinator as a liaison and a voice, if the ultimate decision-making power lies with Chief Osborne as Director of Fire Services, as it says in this option 3, it does not solve any of the issues with regard to the volunteer structure, how do they work that, what's the role of the trustees. I mean, there's just a lot of things that, again, go back to Cindy's point about we have to comply with state law. So there's a lot of questions with regard to option 3 and whether or not it actually will move the ball forward.
So when, if I may follow up, when you're saying affirm the Director of Fire Services as the authority over career and volunteer fire services, we have that existing language now, correct? Mr. County Attorney?
Chairman Brandel, yes. So right now, like I said earlier, it's not a question about if we are or not in compliance with state law. It's 2 different legal opinions from 2 different attorneys. That's why we have judges. That's why we have a Montana Supreme Court. The statute specifically states that a consolidated government has no effect on the existence of volunteer departments, volunteer fire companies, or a fire district created and legally in existence pursuant to the provisions of this part, unless otherwise specifically provided for by charter. Our charter did that in 1996. However, there is a disagreement about whether or not that complies with this law. That's not for this body to decide, that's for a court to decide. And to be honest, right now, the only thing that's separating this is an Attorney General opinion in which County Attorney Bob McCarthy got. The charter does not specifically state anything about their budgets. It doesn't. It's not clear on their budgets. It says it provides the Director of Fire Services is to provide administrative. It's an administrative role in how they work together, and that's how I read the charter. Is that he has authority over how they all work together, but not with regards to their budgets. And so that's the basis of a lot of this argument is they're saying, no, you don't have control over our budget, which I don't disagree with. It's not in the charter. However, this statute specifically states, in my opinion, if it's specifically put in a charter, then it affects existing volunteer fire departments. So if this body decides that there's to be one governing body, the charter has to be very specific on what the Director of Fire Services is allowed to do with volunteers. But to Commissioner Cindy Perdulon's point, I think that will be litigated no matter what, realistically, because this is not a very clear statute. And that happens. That happens with the legislature all the time. We have to bring it in front of a district court judge, which then most of the time it goes to the Montana Supreme Court to determine, is that what was meant here? We look at legislative intent. We look at those types of things. So yes, I, in my opinion, think that the charter can do it. There's another attorney out there that disagrees with me. That's why we have courts.
So if I want to summarize this in an implication, perhaps. So if we go with this option 3, where we affirm Director of Fire Services as authority over career and volunteer fire services, and then we create a volunteer fire coordinator position within that structure, likely we're ending in court if the voters were to affirm this non-change or slight change with the volunteer coordinator position.
Possibly.
And then listening to our working groups deliberations with the volunteers, this is their also least favorite option, correct?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, they have voiced concern because to them, this is pretty much status quo.
Ms. Shaw?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And then on County Attorney Enra's note there, if we leave the status quo, we also face the possibility of getting involved in litigation. So it's kind of a catch-22 in a way.
So I guess the fourth option, so this third option adds some language about a volunteer coordinator position, but a fourth option is do nothing. Like we pitch it back to the county, which has been the option of 50 years of study commissions. Am I correct? Okay. Mr. Steppen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think in these conversations that we've had with options, I'm not sure that there's a scenario amongst these three that doesn't end up in some type of litigation. And I think when we say that the volunteers' most favorable option is removal from the charter, I believe it's from the leadership that has been part of our conversations. It's the only option in their mind, and I don't know that still keeps us from litigation. They were clear that there would likely be challenges over assets and taxing districts down the road, and so at least in our conversations with them. So when we talk about concern over litigation, and I think County Attorney framed it well, those things are in place to help solve some of these disputes, right? Not necessarily need to be looked at as getting sued, so to speak, right? And ultimately, it's likely that an opinion outside of our county attorneys is ultimately going to decide some of these things down the road, no matter which way we go. But I think our job is to frame a structure that can be successful going forward, and then it's up to the people to vote that an affirmation or not, and then for the constituents to make it happen.
Mr. Steppen very well said, and I think we have to remind ourselves that we have been elected and entrusted by the public to help make these decisions and to take all of the available research and information and the considerations of what could happen as we make our deliberations in providing a ballot for our voters. So it is our job, very well said, to evaluate these, and I'd hate to pitch it only to the voter. Like, we have a job of being the first stop and making sure that any initiatives we're presenting to the ballot or to the voter on ballot are thoughtful and likely will lead in a good structured direction and not end up in just another big giant mess. And Ms. Dillon, I know you had your hand up.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I totally agree, and I think this was the reason, and this is my opinion, this is the reason the governor vetoed House Bill 547. He felt that he didn't want the state legislature to make the decisions for Butte-Silver Bow when the Butte-Silver Bow voter could make those choices, and those thoughtful votes for what's best for Butte needs to be decided by Butte people and Butte voters. And so you're absolutely right, Raylyn. It is incumbent upon us. It's incumbent upon the stakeholders who are varied in their options and what they agree with and don't agree with to educate the public in this process as we go forward towards November of 26. It is incumbent upon us to do those listening sessions and do all that education. And to Dan's point, we all need to be educated on what the implications are, some more specificity with that. And I think as we go forward, we'll get, following tonight's discussion, I think we'll get some more with all the options. And so we'll have some more meat to chew on with regard to these. I think this hopefully was a good outlay of where we're at, and hopefully we can drill that down even further.
Mr. Silk.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I believe this would probably be my closing remark. I guess I'm just exhausted with this. I guess I get frustrated when I hear that Butte-Silver Bow is supposed to decide on how its fire service is supposed to be run. When in 1996 it was voted almost 2-1 to have the chief executive and the council of commissioners have a clear relationship with the volunteer fire departments. A living document that can allow the fire department to change instead of trying to change it in charter, which there was a study commission that did fix this. But there's a group of people who don't agree with the way that the community voted. And that's what's frustrating to me. If the fire department isn't run the most efficient way, why shouldn't the Council of Commissioners be able to decide and recommend ordinances that can have a democratic process to run its fire department through its people on an ongoing basis, instead of being so strict in the charter? If Butte-Silver Bow is supplying the money that has the final say without putting another burden on the volunteers and without increasing taxes to the community, why are we worried about what the volunteers want? Why are we worried about what the career department wants? Why don't we worry about what the community wants? And we've seen that through our survey, and I agree with Mr. Steppen that I'm looking forward to another survey from the community, which we have to look at. This back and forth of both sides, career and volunteers, was something that I was hoping we weren't going to get into on this commission and worry about what the people wanted and not what I want, not what a fire chief wants, whether it's a career or volunteer, but what the community wants and what is best for them, and to set the structure up to be moldable throughout the years instead of so strict in a charter. Option 3 on key implications. When I read through those, I don't see a lot of negatives. I know that some people will, but I do know that there's people elected to change ordinances that allow the executive branch to go ahead and enforce those ordinances set by the legislative branch. But if we don't have the ability for our Council of Commissioners to run a department by ordinance and then through the executive branch, why don't we have that ability, and why don't we want that ability? And that's almost a rhetorical question, because I don't want to stay here for too long, and I know that you guys are probably sick of hearing me talk now, but a living document that allows the fire department to change through time and lets Butte-Silver Bow be in charge of a department, I think is just one of the better ways to go about it. Thank you.
Ms. Casey?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I agree with Chad in that I don't want the charter to be so restrictive that our fire departments and our volunteers can't improve over time. And the best way to do that is through the ordinance process in the Council of Commissioners. That is still a very public process that allows everyone to come up and put their opinions in, much like we are today. But I do have a question, and I asked Matt to clarify. This volunteer fire coordinator position, did you say I was envisioning that that's a full-time position within maybe Butte-Silver Bow, but you said it's selected by the volunteers, so it's just a volunteer position? Can you just clarify for me and the thought there?
That's how it is presented here. We had discussion about the previous, and this is where some confusion comes in. There used to be a help me out here, coordinator that was a county employee that was absorbed, I think, by J.R. Richardson in his budget duties. It sounds like it was a budget decision, along with there's just not the amount of work that justifies a full-time position in that regard. And so the way that it is presented here, the volunteer coordinator is a volunteer and selected by the volunteer ranks.
Ms. Dolan?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think to answer your questions, Chad, is simply the fact that the study commission comes every 10 years to solve charter questions. But this issue has been going on for almost 50 years. And to answer your question plainly, you haven't been able to do that. You haven't been able to have a structure of consensus from volunteers and career fire to come up with a game plan to move everybody forward, that's why you've been litigating for 50 years and have different opinions that the county attorney has to look at. So I think what we're trying to do is, yes, you'd like to solve all the problems within fire services, but that's not the reality that we're looking at. We're looking at options for the study commissioners to come up with options to give to the voter in November of 26 to make these ultimate decisions. Because and I have to say, these options, they can always go to status quo and then you'll be back to where we started. But I think that given enough education, enough engagement, I think the voters of Butte-Silver Bow will take this task and try and figure out which the best option moving forward for everybody. And yeah, to the point, we will likely get litigation, but if we can get a structure that makes sense to folks and offer it to them, I think that's the most democratic way to do it.
Mr. Thielen, welcome. I don't know if you need the handout that Mr. Steppen has, but we're going through your working group's 3 options that could be offered on ballot to our voters. And so we've worked through numbers 1 and 2, and we're currently on number 3. But I would open it to you, since you've joined us a little bit late, to add anything that you'd like to from your perspective of the working group. The other members of the working group have offered their advice.
Madam Chair, thank you. I only got a look at this briefly today, so I am going to kind of keep my thoughts to myself for the moment, and then after I can study it and make a better argument, as it were, I think then I will do that probably next week.
Thank you, Mr. Thielen. I wanted to offer you the time if you would like it.
Thank you.
All right. In these options, is there any other questions or things we'd like to think about? I mean, obviously, we're not making any decisions tonight. We're hearing the options. We're considering them. We're probably generating another list of questions. Is there any other things to talk about there? Ms. Casey.
Madam Chair, I just want to clarify, because of the preliminary report and thinking of that timeline, is the intent right now to put, it sounds like option 2's out, that you cannot have 2 chiefs. So is the intent to put both options, 1 and 3, in the preliminary report and then go out to the public? Is that, I guess I'm a little confused, or is it this commission to vote eventually on one option to put forward in the preliminary report?
So what I heard from the working group, and please correct me if I'm wrong, is that they want at least 2 options to go forward in that preliminary report, gather more public input, get maybe some more survey data, and then this commission would come back, review that information, review our public input, and then make a decision on which options to bring to the ballot. And it was proposed that we could bring more than 1, but maybe that wouldn't be the decision of this group after we finish that process. Did I capture it correctly, Mr. Steppen?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mainly, just speaking from the one that did much of the authoring, I think from my standpoint, I think the group felt that the group should decide how many options and which ones going forward, and we didn't feel that the 4 of us were in a position to make a singular recommendation. Understanding that this was the type of topic that could have multiple options going forward.
Okay, so within our preliminary report, then you would be looking for us to maybe say, put all 3 in the preliminary report, reject 1, do we want to deliberate about this more, consider time? You know, I guess I'm looking to the rest of the commission too, and I'll start with Ms. Shaw, and then I'll move back to Ms. Dolan and Mr. Thielen.
Thank you. Age rules, I'm sorry, Cindy. Also, don't forget, there's always the option of status quo, not changing anything. I hate to say it, but that's got to be in there. We don't need not to forget that. Not that that would be my choice, but, you know, I don't know. I don't know how anybody else feels about that, but yeah.
Mr. Thielen, I think you were next.
Madam Chair, I just have a question for Mr. Enruth. They said that option 2 is not viable because you can't have 2 chiefs. If one's a volunteer, I guess I'm a little confused by that. Could you explain that to me, please?
Commissioner Thielen, correct. The way I understood it, though, is you wanted 2 chiefs in the charter, someone in charge of, paid in charge of the volunteers. That was my understanding of what you wanted. There is a section under the statutes with regards to rural fire protection. The problem with that is under the rural fire protection section, if the area is already got fire protection from a municipality, that doesn't fall into play under that section. It says we can appoint a chief and whoever else. But yeah, currently Butte-Silver follows the municipality rules that's in the charter, and when you go to those sections of the statute, it states that you can only have 1 paid chief. We have the person with that title is Director Osborne.
I get that. You can only have 1 paid, but if one's a volunteer, one's paid.
Yes, and that's what I was saying is if the question is if they're both paid, my answer is no. If one is a volunteer, yes.
Okay.
It's because I thought in the study group, in our meeting earlier this week, we were talking about a paid position in the charter, was how I interpreted that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Ms. Dolan?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would just say that, yeah, I think that we should come up with a couple viable options, 1 and 3, and then status quo, and go from there.
Mr. Silk?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I recommend that we just chew on this for a little bit, for a week. I know that we're trying to get to our timeline. I imagine we're going to have some input within this week after from the public who have listened to this or we have discussions with. So I would entertain the option of just digesting everything that we have heard tonight and then coming back to the next meeting with a decision on how many options we're going to move into the preliminary report.
All right, I have hands everywhere. I'm going to start with Mr. Dennehy, and I'll go this way.
Madam Chair, I think it's important to get the information that the volunteer memo that came out today into our preview so we can make an informed decision on exactly what that said. That's just more information. So I think just holding this in abeyance for a week is probably a good idea. As Chad said, I think people might give us some more information as the week goes on, so it kind of makes us more educated on the options that we might be thinking of, but having that piece of information that we don't have tonight, I think it's really important to read those. Since we read the Advisory Fire Commission's letter, I think this is a nice balance to that.
Thank you, Mr. Dennehy. Mr. Steppen?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I believe that what we were planning, based on the correspondence from you, was that we would review, take the week. We have meetings scheduled this week with groups that we've told that action isn't being taken tonight. And I think it's important that we stay the course on that.
I totally agree. Thank you. Ms. Dolan?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Matt. That's exactly right. So, yeah, but I think we still have a lot of people that want to have some input before we get to the option vote on what that looks like. But I would also ask we're going to get some additional information from the volunteers. So for option 3, could we get some sort of follow-up information in writing from the career department, and to say with option 3, what does that look like with regard to authority over the volunteer fire department or fire stations? Because I think that's the crux of the consternation over the decades, and if that's applicable and doable, I think that would help with our deliberations with option 3 on how that will look, and if, number 2, if it will help the current status quo. So to differentiate from what's happening right now and versus what it will look like if option 3 is voted in. With regard to the coordination between career and volunteer, if that question makes sense.
I just have a clarifying question to your question.
Yeah.
So isn't it already spelled out in our ordinance as they stand right now in terms of the authority that the fire services director has? Am I reading that correctly? Mr. Enworth, I guess I'll give it to you.
That is correct. Outside of his authority over their budget, that is not contained in our charter, that is contained in ordinance.
Okay, so then maybe the question is more about budget authority, is that, or are you looking at?
Well, I'm looking, Madam Chair, thank you, and thank you, County Attorney. I'm just looking for some additional clarification because I think we'll be getting those questions in the week. So if we can provide an answer to how that elevates it from the status quo with regard to language, with regard to what it looks like over the authority, all of those additions will help in figuring out if option 3 is indeed a option to move forward, or if it's just pretty much status quo, I'll bet the change with the fire coordinator position.
I'll take Ms. Casey and then I'll take you, Ms. McCormick.
Madam Chair, a thought, because it seems like some of this is boiling down to budget and who has control over it. There is a somewhat fix to this in that just like other departments such as Public Works has a water division budget, a road budget, there could be 9 different budgets for the separate volunteers that through the Director of Fire Services and the Chief Executive or the City Manager, that you each come with your proposed budget, what you need, just like any other department, and you go back and forth, because it is right now it's the Chief Executive's budget, that goes forward. But once that budget's approved, then the chiefs would have some authority to use that money, just like we have authority to use our budget here once the money's approved. I don't know, that might be somewhat of a solution to, because it seems some of this is boiling down to the authority of the budget also. It's just a thought.
I guess I was under the assumption that they already did
That's
that.
what they do.
But
That's what they're supposed to do.
is that what they're supposed to do? But that's not what's happening
So
in
that's
practice?
the ordinance.
But Madam Chair, when you look at the budget book, it's all under fire services. So if it's an equipment budget, it's just a total line item versus, I don't know, 50,000's going to racetrack, 10,000's going to home Atherton, instead of separating out. So if those were separated out like a lot of different, I would use the word division, because you have the department, then you have different divisions where they're separating out their budgets. Then that tells them what they have for the year, and they also have to make a good argument for the money they need. You have to be able to, all departments have to be able to convince the chief executive ultimately to bring forward their budgets. So they would just have to be more involved in the budget process, and that would be through the Director of Fire Services and working of what's important. But, and I've talked to Chad about this. I don't know how the Director of Fire Services feels about it, but there could be some options that might make some of this more amenable to them without getting so taken completely out. They raise their own money, volunteer coordinators. I don't know. It's just a thought to throw out there.
I appreciate the mechanism and increasing the transparency in line items, if you would. Then we know where dollars are going and how they're allocated, and then that volunteer department is therefore also responsible for the balance at the end of the year and reporting how they've spent those funds to the public. So something to consider and put in the hopper. Ms. Dolan?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think that is a good question, and unfortunately, that's not the process right now, and that's another bone of contention. The fact that, you know, the Director of Fire Service currently deals with the budget authority unilaterally. And so the fact that the volunteer in many departments, and this is what we've learned over time, over the past year, of having questions and working group and all of that, is the fact that the monies are in one pot, and the Director of Fire Services currently decides where the money goes, how the money's spent, and it doesn't filter to the volunteers. They have equipment that hasn't been fixed. This is just something that needs to be figured out, and that is another good option. But if we can get some meat on these options and come back, I think it will help us all a lot.
All right, Mr. Silk.
Yeah. Thank you, Madam Chair. I know that we've just been learning, you know, stuff over the last year, but being a part of this process for almost 2 decades, we do need to follow the ordinance. And even if there is emails sent out to volunteer chiefs to supply a budget so the Director of Fire Services can put that in his budget, there's not full participation all the time. So it's easy to say that, you know, the Director of Fire Services gets to spend the money how it wants, but Ms. Casey said it perfectly. It's the Chief Executive's budget. And also, I think it's very important if to look at the Director's request over the years for volunteer departments, because when I hear that there's no money filtered to them, that's completely wrong. An average of $253,000 over the last 4 years has been spent on the volunteers, whether that's maintenance or PPE. So we need all the facts before we get into, you know, this side or that side. And I don't want to get into that, but sometimes facts need to be put out there, and that is one of the facts. Thank you.
Other comments? Okay, so I think we have consensus to chew on this a little bit more. Come back next week with preparation to make some recommendations of what's going in the preliminary report. And honestly, I don't have any problem of including as much of our background research and our analysis in that preliminary report. You know, it doesn't marry us to this is what's going on the ballot. There's still process to be done. And I think there are other avenues to pursue. And even if we change something, I think looking at this budget authority and making sure those line items are called out is probably a very good idea. It creates more transparency in the budget. All right, if there's no further discussion on fire services, we can move forward to new business. And under that item, we don't have anything unless anybody has something on their mind they want to add to new business. Very good job, guys. There's no public hearing tonight. Other scheduled matters. Somebody sent an email about some public outreach. Was that Mr. Silk or Ms. Shaw? Was it you? Sorry, I can't remember who sent the email about another group that was inviting us to speak. Ms. Shaw?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, I'm a member of the Exchange Club, and they were really anxious to hear what we're doing. And I did say maybe they have 2 dates that were after, well, let's just say the second date I told you in February, which is toward the end of the month, that might be a better one to discuss what, you know, once we have the preliminary report done, maybe if not, then maybe out in March. But they're just interested. They want to know how we're doing. So, and
Right.
and also there was a great article I thought in the paper, just a nice preliminary blush on what's, you know, what you're in there. I think Mike Smith quoted you. It was just a a little FYI, how we're at, where we're at in the whole process.
We are scheduled also for February 25th on Party Line, so hopefully we have our preliminary report ready to tout out, and so we can deliberate about who wants to go to that and et cetera. All right, announcements. Our next weekly study commission meeting is on February 2nd in the council chambers. And so with that, Mr. Thielen.
Boy, did I get here in time. Make a motion to adjourn and let's go home.
And Ms. Shaw seconds. Any opposed? Stay in your chair.